love to have you here. As long as you enjoy staying. This is also streaming live onto YouTube, and we are going to make an amazing article afterwards with takeaways from Dan, because Dan is my go-to person about corporate partnerships. So this is really exciting for me. Always love to be in Dan's company. We're so glad you're here. As you know, today we're talking about corporate partnerships, and I feel like this is a little bit of it's becoming more and more important, and it's also a bit of a little blind spot for nonprofits. So we're going to talk about what you need to know, what's changing, how to build relationships with business that go beyond that one-time sponsorship, which I think is the piece I'm trying to figure out myself. So before we dive in, we're going to do quick housekeeping. This is being obviously hosted through StreamYard, a great platform. This session is recorded, so you will get a replay right afterwards if needed. This is meant to be conversational, so please feel free to drop thoughts in real time into the comments. That tends to make these kinds of webinars and AMAs much stronger. We're going to start with a few questions that came through registration after Dan does this presentation, and I'm going to weave in live questions kind of where we can and where it makes sense. We're not trying to figure this all out today. I hope this feels conversational and it feels like something that you walk away with a little bit of ideas afterwards. And people are welcome to say where they're from, your organization, any of that you'd like to share would be great. And with that, I'm going to introduce my friend Dan here quick. So I'm just going to talk about something, introduce him quick, and then we're going to let him take it away with a quick presentation. So Dan Drucker is the founder of Philanthropy Fuel, where he helps nonprofits build strategic, long-term corporate partnerships that go beyond the traditional sponsorships. So Dan's a 35-year career in B2B sales. Actually, when we first met, Dan was just moving into doing his own thing, which was very cool for me. And he's had over a decade as a vice president for a division of Canon. Dan's now bringing all of this corporate lens to the nonprofit sector, helping organizations better understand how businesses think, give, and engage. So through client work, workshops, and he's got an amazing weekly newsletter, The Fuel Tank. I'll make sure to drop it in the comments here. Dan equips nonprofit leaders with practical strategies to identify aligned partners, communicate their value with clarity, and build relationships that lead to sustainable support. So Dan also happens to be one of our advisory board members at the Nonprofit Hive. I am continually thankful for the guidance he provides me. So Dan, I'm going to hand this over to you. And if I missed anything, please throw some more information in there about yourself too.
No, I think you hit everything. I'm just checking my own bio now on the screen. I think you got it. And, the nice thing, I moved into this, obviously after spending like 35 years in corporate, and I knew I wanted to do something else. And that something else was helping the nonprofit sector. But I didn't know what I was going to do. And I just kind of fell into this whole thing about corporate partnerships and helping a couple of international nonprofits, reach corporations here in the US that might have, shared value or interest in what their mission was all about. And we were able to set up some high level meetings. And I started to see that there was a need there. There was something really missing. So Tasha mentioned my background, so I won't go through that again. I will add that I am a passionate dog shelter volunteer. You will often see my rescue dog Griffin in my content and in my newsletter. I'm an amateur photographer. Canon was nice enough to give me a brand new Canon on my camera on my way out. So I do like to get outside and walk around in nature and take photos. It's good for the mind, it's good for the body, and it's fun. And I'll share this with Tasha after, so she can send that out along with the recording, and you'll have all my contact information. You can find me on LinkedIn, just about every day. I post content probably 3, 4, 5 days a week, and I'm commenting and having conversations on there just about every day. So I'm excited about today. I want to just cover some general stuff, some high level stuff. What Tasha said before is really true. We're not going to figure it all out today. In fact, I've been doing it now for a couple of years, and I haven't figured it all out, but I have found some definite trends that are very important to know about. So I want to start with this because I think it's really important. And Tasha, everybody can see my screen, right?
Yep, good to go, Dan. Looks great.
So before we start, this might be the most important. When you get this PowerPoint, I'm going to say you guys should print this out, frame it, and put it by your desk, okay? Your organization, I don't care how small you are, where you are, what you do, you're not at a deficit in these partnership conversations. You don't have to become more corporate. You don't have to reinvent your mission, your programs, your impact. None of that stuff has to change. But there are things that are changing, both on the corporate side and the nonprofit side. And there are certain things that have to change. And that's what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes before we dive into the questions. So let's talk about what's changed on the corporate side. In the couple of years I've been doing this, I've seen corporate partnerships become more and more important as federal funding and other sources of funding, have dried up or at least become a little bit more unpredictable. I've seen it's kind of a dichotomy now on the corporate side. One change to me is really, really good and really, really helpful to nonprofits. The other is a little bit upsetting. I'm going to share both of them with you. The one that's good is, and I'm going to talk in sweeping generalism. So obviously it's not every company believes in this and not every nonprofit does the things I'm going to say happen in the sector, but it's the majority. So what I've seen with companies is they have evolved from simply wanting to pay money in some way, way, shape, or form, a gift, whatever, a donation, write a check, whatever it might be, just in exchange for some kind of logo placement, whether it's sponsoring a golf outing, getting their name on a program at the gala, getting a social media post about them. So just trading money for visibility is not really what corporations want anymore. They want partnerships that go much deeper than that. Employee engagement has quickly risen up towards the top in what is desired from businesses in partnerships, because they're in a struggle to attract talent, retain talent, motivate that talent, especially when you start talking about millennials and Gen Z. They often want to work for a company that has demonstrated that they are truly, truly invested in generating social change. They want to get involved in advocacy. They want to run joint programs. They want to know how they can create real impact together with their nonprofit partners. They don't just want, a check and PR. So that's great. I think that is wonderful. And we're going to talk about why that's wonderful for nonprofits. What I've seen the last few months, at least here in the US, I suspect it's global, but certainly here in the US, because of everything going on, is, companies don't like risk. They certainly don't like risk to their brand. I know I worked for Canon for many, many years, a very recognizable name, global, top company, tech leader, really good company as far as what they do in the community. But I saw even then, don't do anything that puts the logo at risk. So certain causes, certain missions are going to have it much harder than others if their cause is something that would be considered, controversial, which you and I may not consider them controversial, but they don't want to get caught up in the political and media crosshairs. That doesn't mean you can't get corporate partnerships. It just means the search is going to have to go a little bit deeper to find those companies that are willing to step up and represent those causes. You start talking about an animal rescue, it becomes a lot easier, right? There's no debate on there. There's usually no politics involved in that, although there can be. I've learned that. But so those are the two things that I've really seen. From a nonprofit side, the big thing is you've got to change from thinking about who's going to fund us or who's going to sponsor us, and think about where is their shared value. Where does shared value already exist? So I'm not knocking sponsorship. If you're having a golf outing, if you're having a gala or some other event, oh my God, by all means, have somebody sponsor that. Have somebody provide the funding, have somebody provide the goods that you might put into your raffles, your silent auctions, all that. Absolutely. That stuff's important, but it's not a partnership. It's still transactional. It's still based on logo placement and visibility. And what happens there is, and I've seen this so many, even with clients I've worked with for a period of time, it causes the nonprofits, it causes you all to underplay your real value because you just asked for, something small, a donation of goods, a basket to give away, a one-time donation, and we'll put your name up in lights. That's not really talking about partnerships. So your sponsorship brain is saying something like, what can we get them to pay for? Because nonprofits are very focused on needs, and I get that. Your partnership brain says, what can we build together that creates value for both sides? And that's really important. So if you look at the question, I think this may have been one of the submitted questions, what should nonprofits be doing instead of sponsorships? It starts with a little bit of introspection and then talking to your staff, your volunteers, your board, your major donors, your communities. Understand your organization's unique value and assets and how they help the right business, not any business, but the right businesses, move closer to meeting their own goals. That's what it's all about. Okay. When I talk to nonprofits leaders, I find that so many of them don't even realize that they have tremendous value that they already bring. And maybe that's because their head is buried so deep in the work for years and years, or maybe because they've never asked that question. But those valuable things that we're going to talk about in a second are huge assets. Now, there's a lot of small nonprofits on this call, and there's certainly a lot of small and mid-sized nonprofits out there in the world. Bringing more value doesn't mean be bigger or more corporate, okay? You've already got assets that companies care about. Where I see nonprofits struggle is in translating those assets, that value, that uniqueness into business relevance. I think it's all about translation. So, I mean, you all know this already, but don't necessarily think that way. So some of your assets might be incredible community trust and credibility that businesses just don't have. Access to people, stories, lived experiences, volunteers that are mobilized and passionate, employee engagement opportunities for volunteerism, skills-based volunteering, advocacy, just everything. You know, visibility in a local market, subject matter expert. What I mean by that is you are living in communities. You are seeing problems and how they can be solved. You're seeing what the roadblocks are. When I was in marketing and heading up a marketing for a division of Canon, I would pay thousands, maybe $10,000 for market research and get something like this from one of the big consultants that was probably obsolete by the time I read through it. But you all are out there in the quote field, living these problems for years, every single day, and talking to the people who are impacted by your solutions and by what's going on around them in the world. It is invaluable to businesses trying to make a mark in their community. You've got programs that connect to employees, to advocacies, to their customers, to the communities they work and live in. Those things aren't just internal resources. They are building blocks towards successful partnerships, and they're assets that you own. And I think that's one of the biggest things you have to remember. The next thing, and I apologize, I had to sneak in one of my own photos here. That was from taken, I think it was last year in Nova Scotia, obviously over the water. So I have something called the shared value bridge, and it could have been a Venn diagram, because what we're looking for is, where is that overlap? It's a simple way to move from please support us, please sponsor us, to here is where our priorities intersect. You're a nonprofit, you've got your mission, you've got your programs, you've got your community insights I just talked about, incredible trust, stories, authenticity. And on the other side, you got the company. They got their employees, their customers, their products and services, their brand, which is huge, their marketing reach, which is huge, their community priorities, and quite frankly, their need and their desire to make money, profit and revenue. In between there is shared value. The bridge helps translate what you have as a nonprofit and what matters to them as a business. So where do you start, right? What do you do? You're sitting out there and you're like, okay, we'd love to do this. What I see nonprofits do a lot is start with who has the most money, who are the biggest nonprofits, who are the biggest companies in town, right? Who's the most recognizable name? Who has supported nonprofits in the past? Those things aren't wrong, but it's a lot better to start with where is their alignment? Because one of the things, I would encourage you is don't confuse visibility with compatibility. The most known company out there may not be a fit for your organization. I've had too many small nonprofits, ask me things like, let's reach out to, Coca-Cola or Goldman Sachs or whatever, Capital One. So that's just not going to work. First of all, I don't even think you could handle a partnership with them. Second of all, you're not going to be able to help them meet their goals. And it's often the local business, the regional business, a business has a big footprint in your community or where there's a crossover in audience. So let's talk about what the signals are. Geographic overlap, community overlap, audience overlap, or they want access to a new audience. And that audience is a big part of either your community or your donor base. That's huge. You've got ways that they can get their employees engaged. It's huge. I hear that every day from CSR officers, human resources officers. They want to get their employees engaged authentically, not just with volunteer days, deeper than that. Your customers or their customers, their markets may already be connected to your mission. Think about how strong that is. If your mission is already supported by people who are customers or prospects of theirs, that is so important for them because they want to demonstrate their value to all their stakeholders. Again, their existing programs are going to come into play. Is there a history of supporting causes like yours? But I wouldn't get too caught up to the fact that, they made a big donation to the United Way 4 years ago. That may be more coincidence than strategy. Big thing is this last bullet, this last checkpoint. You're just looking to start a conversation. It's all about conversations. So forget your sponsorship packages for now. Forget your fancy proposals, grants, and all that stuff. You're not trying to sell them on a multi-year, partnership concept on day one. You are looking for a low barrier entry to a simple conversation, a starter conversation, and then it'll grow from there as you begin to learn and ask questions on what really matters to that business and where your priorities, kind of overlap. So I can tell you this, businesses, as good as they want to make themselves sound, they do not partner with nonprofits simply because they feel like partnering with nonprofits. They partner because nonprofits can help them accomplish things that they couldn't accomplish on their own. And that is huge leverage for your organization. I shouldn't do builds. I just recommend to everybody, don't do builds because you forget you have more bullets at the bottom. This isn't something where you want to have a list of 50 companies to approach or 100 companies to approach. I didn't even do that in my corporate B2B days because we had very specific service offerings for very specific vertical markets. If you're selling a commodity, sure, you're going to have a huge list and it's a numbers game. But for you and what I do with my clients, at the end, I probably want to have a list of 10 businesses with the real reason why they might find what we do very, very valuable. And then I am going to customize the approach for each of those businesses so that we're talking directly to the right person with the right message at the right time. Again, just simply to start a conversation and see if there's something we can build upon. Remember what I said earlier, you don't have to change your mission. You don't have to change your program. You don't have to create new programs for a company. Your programs are already working. They already have value. You just need to make it easier for businesses to understand why the impact that you already have, that you already create, what it means to them, why it matters to them, and why it's going to help them get closer to their goals, because that's what it's all about, because that's what they're going to have to report upwards. There's nothing you do in a corporation, and I learned this in all my days there, that doesn't have to be approved, that you don't have to build a business case for, and that isn't going to be asked about once it's initiated in terms of how's it going? Are we hitting, all the different, priorities and milestones that we put there? What's been the ROI? What's going on? Is it getting the employees excited? That's going to be the process on the corporate side. So they have to understand why it's important to them. So now enough about this. I want to dive into questions because that is way more fun. Hopefully I gave you a little bit of an overview. Obviously I dive much deeper than this in workshops and things like that. But I think it's important to understand you've already got the value. And this is really about translating the value and then finding the right partners where shared opportunity already exists because you've got some kind of overlap. So I'm going to get out of this.
That was awesome. Dan, I always love listening to you talk about things that I think most of us feel like we should know this, right? It's, but it's so hard to keep top of mind, and it's so fantastic. We already have some questions coming in the comments here, which is great. And again, people, please throw them in. We did have people submit, so we've got both ends to go on here. But Dan, we're going to kick off with this great question from Jen. But what's your favorite way to start a conversation that earns the company's time and avoids sounding pitchy? I think that's a nonprofit fear, sounding pitchy, right? So
pitchy, I know. I was told by the sector, don't use the word sales because nobody likes, to talk about sales and fundraising and nonprofit. That's a great question, Jen. And actually, it's funny when I opened up the screen, that was the first thing that popped up. So I'm glad you did it. Really low key. I'm going to talk all about them. It's funny. I think in the first conversation, nonprofits and quite frankly, sales teams too in corporate, they feel like they have to talk about them or they're missing an opportunity, right? I got to tell them about our organization. I got to tell them about our mission. I got to tell them about what we do. And, I've got this great idea. What I would say is, before I get to that point, Jen, I have done my homework. So I've identified, like I said, those businesses where there's potentially an overlap. Doesn't mean you're going to be right, where there's potentially an overlap. I've looked at, at press releases, their websites. I've seen quotes from executives, so I understand what their main thing is. And I go in there with something in mind. And if I think employee engagement is the big thing, then I want to already have an idea. It doesn't have to be anything that's ironed out or polished, but an idea of how this nonprofit can get their employees involved. And that's how I'll start the conversation. I'll say, I saw on your website, you're the head of employee relations. I saw on your website that you talked about all the different ways to get your employees involved in the community. I'm working with an organization that provides after school mentoring to youths with disabilities. I'm winging this as I go along. Is some of what you want to get your employees involved does it come around like mentorship to people in the community? Little low level, and if they say, yeah, that's exactly what we're focused on, then we just start talking. It's just a regular conversation. It's as simple as that. I am not talking partner. I don't even use the word partnership in that first conversation. I'm certainly not talking multi-year. I do not use the word funding. I certainly don't use the word sponsorship. I am looking for that little connection. Remember my little bridge with my awesome picture under it? That's what I'm looking for, that little connection that starts a conversation and gets them excited. And then you just naturally go where the next step goes. And maybe it's right away. Okay, let's talk about a pilot program. Or maybe there's other people that need to get involved in further conversations. That's it. Low key, low barrier to entry, nothing scary, and all focused on what's important to them.
I love that. I think that's such it feels really smooth when you say it like that. Like, hey, we just got to connect first. And that is a huge part. If there's no connection on it's hard to keep pushing on something. And partnership's a loaded word, right? Like that's a big word. And just because we think that a corporation would have capacity to handle a partnership does not mean that that's actually the truth, right? Or where they are at. I think, love that answer, Jen. Great question. This is a big one from Wendy. I'm going to leave it up because it's going to be hard to look through, but she's talking about how do we communicate our value when the ROI is often like later, right? Yeah. This is a big thing for me, Wendy. Thanks for pulling this one up. This is a big one for me.
I love it. So I've had this conversation and yeah, there's two types of nonprofits out there. There's the one that are filling the need today. You can think soup kitchens and stuff like that. And then the ones that are trying to truly end hunger at its core, across the world over the next half a century, right? And you're absolutely right. It's a little bit of a more difficult conversation because you can't see the ROI. You can't see it's probably just difficult even with donors sometimes have a hard time processing, I want to solve a problem today. I want to feed a child. I want to save an animal. I want to plant a tree, whatever it is, versus, I want to solve these problems long term. However, I always, I talk about how businesses, build partnerships, but they don't. There's no such thing as a business building a partnership. People build partnerships. I don't want to be so cliche. I always joke that I never sold anything to an office building or a skyscraper in my whole, 35-year sales career. So you're dealing with people who can understand. You have to sell them and get them involved in a conversation. Again, I would still have that first conversation about something where there's that overlap, something why your mission would matter and help them achieve their goals. Forget the ROI for a second. What could they do? Is it getting their employees involved? And again, it doesn't have to be a volunteer day. And I know a lot of nonprofits feel that those things are not necessarily that helpful because people show up and don't know what they're doing. But if you get their employees excited, that's half the battle, just so you know. But there's other ways to do volunteerism. There's something simple as advocacy. If you take a business and let's say, I'm not even talking about a major corporation. Let's say they've got 250 people and you can get 20% of them to share with their network some stories you've put together for them, whether it's, a video or text or whatever, out to their networks. Your little, I don't even want to say one person comms department because it's probably 1/8 of a person comms department as you as the founder or executive director are wearing all these different hats. Can't possibly reach the audiences they can. So that alone might be something little, or maybe it's just, hey, you know what? Let's do a joint marketing campaign, something small. Now, what you also have to do with them at the same time, if they're biting on all this is start to show them where the progress is going to be made. No false promises. This thing isn't being solved today. I can't show you an ROI or a stat package or report that's going to show you this was solved today. But what I can show you is progress, or even better, stories of how we're helping people and how we're heading towards this path. The best thing you can do is you're bringing them along. If you find the right person, they get excited about where you're going, and they could help out with this strategy and shape where that's going. And again, maybe help you out with advocacy. Maybe it's, maybe there's some other things that have to be done politically to get certain things approval. They may have more juice. They have a bigger marketing engine. So it's starting that conversation small, finding one thing that you can do with them, but you have the added, I guess, challenge of walking them down the path of where this is headed over the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years. I had, I think you probably know Tasha, Matt Baker White. He runs Worpy, which is, oh my God, I should know what it is. But they do wilderness courses out in Montana. It's college level courses, and they take these students for either 6 weeks, part of a semester for actual credit. They take them and they're learning all about conservation, both sides. They're also meeting with people who run mines and understanding why mines still exist. And they're getting real shape. Problem is, these are students that are going to become leaders, maybe in 10, 15, 20 years. So they have to tell the stories, as soon as the first couple did a little something to make a difference, they use those as those stories. So I think it's building the stories, but again, I still think it's finding that hook.
That's great. Amazing advice there, Wendy. Thanks for asking that question. That's one that is very near and dear to my heart.
I do want to add something, Tasha. So
yeah,
those organizations that have that quote easy thing about today, we rescued 2,000 animals. I know I always fall back to animal rescue because I love it. Even that doesn't mean anything. We rescue abandoned animals doesn't mean anything to a business. Now they may say that's awesome, great work, pat on the back, attaboy, and then they move on. You've got to still translate that into business relevance. That business relevance might be like employee and family volunteer opportunities. It might be, civic responsibility and civic visibility and becoming a good citizen if that's important to your customers or your employees. So you still, even when you've got the mission that delivers stats every day, you've still got to translate that mission into terms that businesses are going to care about.
Absolutely. And according to the composition of the business itself, different things, of the employees within the business, the leadership, different things may be more exciting, right? For them to sponsor and feel very near and dear. Loretta's got a great example here. And I know you just started to talk about a very specific example, but could you share an example of a successful partnership where, the nonprofit, it was easy for the corporate partner to understand their impact? So when we're talking about this, how do we, translate, like you said, the storytelling piece? How do we bring that in?
Yeah, I can give you a few quick examples on translation, but I'll give you the biggest one. It was an environmental nonprofit. I can't remember the name. I'm terrible with names. But the first gut feel is to build a list based on who supported those type of causes in the past. And I'm going to be honest, that's how I started out doing research for nonprofits. Who has supported this type of a mission in the past 5 years, blah, 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 whatever parameters. And you get a list of people who donated, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I was helping a tiny little Ukraine-based nonprofit that does crisis counseling and relocation services a few years ago. And it was easy to look up the companies that had donated to the Ukraine causes at the beginning of the war. But a lot of them, they made one donation, they got their visibility. And I'm not saying they didn't care, and then they disappeared. I found one person who had stayed involved. In fact, had gotten involved with the government and Zelensky and all that. And again, she happened to be, no surprise, she was Ukrainian, and she also sat in a really, really high level position at MasterCard. So I reached out based on that emotion. One LinkedIn DM, and I had set up a meeting between, I think she was the head of global affairs at MasterCard, one of the biggest companies around, and this basically 3-person nonprofit based in Germany serving the Ukraine. And then there were proposals exchanged, et cetera, et cetera. But the example I want to give was the environmental one. So I used to just look, and their first thing was, let's look at who supported environmental causes. But we dug deeper into what companies have made environmental conservation, environmental leadership part of their brand? So think, Patagonia, things like that, REI, that they're living it every day. It's important to them, their employees, their customers. And we started reaching out based on that connection. We're already doing the same thing. We already share a mission. And then you have to find out what's important to them that you can kind of key on. So it was the same kind of conversation. It's making it easy because they already believe in what you believe in. It's part of their brand. It's part of what they do. When you start talking about like mentoring youth and things like that, you're looking for companies that are investing in workforce development, that have a vested interest in creating future leaders. That's what makes the conversations the easiest. If you just talk about simple translations, I gave you the one with the animal rescue. There's a bunch that you could say. Again, we planted 10,000 trees. But what does that mean to a company? Well, again, if it's a company that has made environmental conservation part of their brand, it's going to potentially be important. And if they could get somehow, their employees involved in that, now you could take it a step further, and maybe you could create something together, a program. I actually have, Tasha, a very, very sophisticated translation test that I asked nonprofits to use. You can tell where my sarcasm's coming in, and it is just, it's just saying, so what? We rescue abandoned animals. So what? What does that really mean? We planted 10,000 trees. We mentor, youth after school. So what? And I don't mean that sarcastically. Those aren't enough to get a company and the person that you represent, that you're trying to reach, excited. They have to understand what it means to them and how it's going to help them get closer to their goals. It's really that simple. And the other thing I would warn about is, don't just think your contacts have to come from the CSR space, the corporate social responsibility space. I've seen a lot of partnerships and a lot of conversations go with marketing, human resources, employee relations, community relations, executives, talent management, talent development, operations. It really depends on what your unique value is and how you've translated that and what programs you have that you think are going to be the ones you build upon.
I think that's really, really great insight, Dan. Many, many things. I see lots of people jumping in on the comments here as well. And I'm going to bring this one back up. And I know you kind of you touched on this a little bit during the presentation, but I want to bring it back up because I think it's really, really important. And it's something I get hung up on, is the wording. But sponsorship versus partnership, what is the difference? Because I think for many of us, we're just like, it feels all the same. And, but I do think there's some nuance there that many of us nonprofits struggle with.
It is. So I will say this. Sponsorship is not bad. You heard me say it earlier. If you're having events, whatever it might be, auctions, things like that, get people to pay for it. Get sponsors to pay for it. I would also say one opportunity to look for who could become partners are your existing sponsors. I'll come back to that in a second. Sponsorship's transactional. It's money for something in return, usually some kind of visibility, access, an invitation. You get to force them in the golf outing, you get a table at the gala. Maybe that table at the gala allows them to bring some of their key customers along so they look good in front of their customers. It's all great, but it's one time. Now, maybe they do it year after year. That's awesome, but it's still transactional. They're a recurring donor or they're a major donor. A partner is so much more. A partner is both organizations bringing value, building something together that gets bigger and bigger. And it's something that goes on over time and starts to take on, what I'll call like different legs in different areas. It's getting more than just money involved. It's getting, like I talked about before, advocacy, volunteerism, joint problem solving, joint marketing campaigns. Maybe it's, apparel. We're all, I know Tasha, you're familiar with, Cherry Willow and doing these campaigns with nonprofits where you've got a corporate logo and a nonprofit logo or mission statement, and you're selling stuff to various people, their customers and your supporters, to raise money and things like that. There's so many things out there that you can do together. And that's what it's really all about, is kind of building this whole plan together where both organizations get closer to meeting their goals versus it's just a one-time thing.
And as a marketer, I will say that most corporate businesses or businesses in general do have a marketing budget compared to many host nonprofits
Yeah,
that are doing the leanest, grittiest, scrappy marketing on the planet. So there is even a piece of like awareness, community awareness that I think businesses can help provide to nonprofits that it is part of it for sure. It doesn't necessarily need to be an event. It can be a much longer term relationship, right? That feels more like a partnership than just a
absolutely.
straight up sponsorship.
And oh, by the way, here in the United States, and I do not pretend to be a tax expert, but the laws changed for companies heading into this year where they have to be able to write it off. They have to do, it's got to be 1%. The gift, the donations in total have to be 1% of their revenue or something like that. And if I'm misstating it, I apologize. But so a lot of companies, one of the ways around that is don't make it part of the CSR budget, make it part of the marketing budget, make it part of the operations budget, make it part of, these other areas. And it's not fake, because if you're doing joint marketing, if you're getting their employees involved, if you're doing different things, now you're talking about a partnership, not a donation. It's very different. So it even could have tax implications, at least here.
Absolutely. I love that. So there was another great question here. I got two more questions, and some people kind of brought in the things. I know we're already, somehow this is flying by. It's already 39 minutes in.
All right.
It's
You
crazy.
guys will all have my contact information.
Yes, I've been
You
dropping
can reach out to
your
me.
LinkedIn. I'm going to add all your other stuff here. People, please make sure to connect with Dan, because obviously, as you've seen, he's phenomenal. Susan has a great question here, and then I have time for one more question after this. But Susan's asking about, and you kind of bringing it up, I know we're highly American across the Hive community and on this call. So, how is this affecting a lot of, federal funding? And like now there's this whole new relationship, I think, happening with the corporate sector, and that opening up potential, and also how do corporations look at this right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's, the easy question is it's had a huge impact. And it was one of the things I noticed. So when I just coincidentally happened to move into this kind of area of focus, that's about when, all the things were going on with federal funding and USAID and all that stuff. And what happened was a lot of nonprofits realized they need to diversify. And I know that term is thrown out a lot, but if they realize they need to diversify, they need to find other ways to fund themselves. When you think about the federal funding, I mean, especially if you were a nonprofit that relied 50% on it, 80% of it, that's not going to be made up by individual donors. It's just not. I mean, unless you happen to know, Melinda Gates or something like that, and have her on speed dial, good for you. But that's probably not going to happen, right? As much as your individual donors, because I do believe every nonprofit, every mission has a subgroup of people that are ticked off over various things going on in the world and want to double down on their involvement, their funding, volunteerism, advocacy, and they want to fight with you, and they want to fight for you, alongside you, and that's great. But they're not going to be able to make up tens of hundreds of millions of dollars. Companies could, and again, if you found the right one, it could grow into that. It's not going to be day one, but it can grow into that. So that's where I think it's important. But what I said earlier, there's also those. Think about the reason federal funding was cut and what's going on in the U.S. There are companies that are going to stay away from certain missions because you may meet with a contact and they may become an individual donor. They may become a volunteer, an advocate, because they love your mission, but they also may tell you, I can't do it because I've been told we can't get involved in, nonprofit causes that have to do with, I don't know, race or certain, groups in the population, because we just can't afford to get caught in the media crosshairs or the political crosshairs. And I hate it, and it's sickening, and it depresses me. But also, having come from corporate, I also understand it. A lot of these companies, it's a fine line between success and failure, and even going out of business, and a really big hit to the reputation, or just, a hatchet job by the media or social media or something like that can just be absolutely a brand killer. So it's tough. It's tough. But I do think there is an opportunity to replace some of that revenue with corporate partnerships, a lot more than you get from individuals.
Yeah. I think there's also something I'm really considering and looking at too, where small businesses though, I think actually often, especially if the owner, founder, whatever is still involved, they sometimes actually want to be heavily aligned in alignment values, right? In a way that corporate businesses get to the spot where there's investors and all of these things. So sometimes I think sometimes small businesses, and maybe your slightly spicier mission politically right now, they may actually be more like they're looking to align themselves with
Yes,
something that's super values aligned. So I'm experiencing that at least with smaller
absolutely.
businesses, not big corporations, but smaller businesses.
You're better off building a small list of, not the biggest names. And because you're right, they're going to have a lot more flexibility. I've also learned more in the retail side that local, presence, local offices of major global retailers have a lot of their own decision-making authority. So if you get to know like the local Home Depot manager, the local ShopRite manager, those people can actually make decisions on partnerships, certain level of funding, but certainly getting their employees involved. And they're excited because they're part of your neighborhood, they're part of your community, and they want to solve those problems. So those are really, big names, but they're small groups out of those big names. And then you've got your local businesses and people that are just kind of community based.
Fantastic. Okay, so we are on our very last question here. Matt's, I hope you're still on the call, Matt Staples. And again, if you have questions, reach out to Dan. Dan's amazing. Everyone should be connecting and talking with Dan. But Matt's talking about, again, it's a great question. So should we be trying to convert individual employees into ongoing volunteers, or do we deepen our relationship with the organization as a whole? And I think those are really hard pieces as a small nonprofit to hold in your hand at the same time.
So listen, I would certainly make it easy enough for any, employees that get involved in volunteering to continue to volunteer with the organization, even if it's not through the company. But this is just my personal opinion. I would not make that the focus, because your focus here is to build a corporate partnership. So I think you want to get the employees excited and use that excitement, that momentum, to then say, all right, what's the next thing we're going to do? Maybe it's another employee engagement activity, or maybe it's some advocacy, or maybe it's building a program together, or maybe it's, a joint marketing campaign. So I think you want to use that. If you think about, I worked in corporations. There's probably people on this call that have worked in businesses before on the for-profit side. You think about when employees are excited about something, leadership's going to listen, right? It's going to at least be heard. So I think you use that for momentum. But I would also tell you this, and there was a question that I had seen earlier on that didn't come up, is what if we don't have volunteer opportunities? That's okay. So you've got your traditional volunteer people go somewhere to do something. They could be going there to, stuff backpacks, put boxes of supplies together, food distribution, all that kind of great stuff, right? That's only one kind of even volunteering. You've got skills-based volunteering. You've got where, a financial company or just a finance department within a company could provide financial literacy workshops if you serve, an underfunded neighborhood or that kind of a population. Or quite frankly, don't forget about your own needs. Maybe they can help you with your finances. Maybe an IT department can help you with your tech stack. Maybe a marketing department can help you with your comms, right? So there's a lot of things you can do there as far as skill-based. I talked about advocacy and social media reach. That's another big thing. Or people can volunteer remotely. Maybe it's not realistic for somebody to come to your place of work and do something physically, but they could send letters on your behalf. They could do data entry. They could do research. I mean, there's so much that people could get involved in. So I wouldn't just think about volunteerism as an employer volunteer day, at our site for one day doing a certain activity. Those are great, but there's dozens of other things that you could get employees involved in and get them excited about.
And I think really excited employee teams are amazing peer-to-peer fundraisers often for us, right? As well, like if you have a first event and they're like all jazzed and they're like, oh, this is exactly the mission we all love, peer-to-peer campaigns can be brilliant as well. And so I know we're at time. All you lovely humans who've been here in the comments, giving your thoughts, thank you. This was amazing. And Dan, thank you so much. I'm a super fan of everything that Dan puts out to the world, and just has been such a wonderful guidance for us at the Nonprofit Hive as we figure out how we're engaging into the corporate world. But please make sure to go and find Dan, Philanthropy Fuel. I've thrown his LinkedIn here. We're going to send it out afterwards. There was a great corporate partnership blueprint that I threw into the comments. You should definitely go and check out. But one last statement, Dan, on corporate partnerships. If you had to have one last go-to thing you would say to this amazing group of humans, what would it be?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing nonprofits have been lacking is, I mean, it's real simple. It's confidence. There's always feeling that they're just lucky if a company, writes them a check or wires them some money or buys a table. And what I would love for you all to leave here today, forget all the tactics and everything, would be to realize that you already have such tremendous value and assets to the business world. And that's not just rhetoric. You absolutely do. All those things I talked about and then some. That take a moment to be introspective, talk to your staff, talk to your board, talk to your volunteers, talk to your major donors, and find out what those things are, and then figure out what type of businesses would naturally value the assets, the value that you're already creating and want to be a part of it. And those are the people you want to research. Those are the companies that you want to reach out to. You're already doing great things. You got to translate it a little bit and then get in front of the right people and just start a simple conversation. That's all you're trying to do. So you've got it within you to do it. You just have to believe in it.
I love that. All right. Thanks so much, Dan. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. It was wonderful. Full recording will also be on YouTube if you need it, and we will be sending out notes and everything after we're finished here. But cheers. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Appreciate it.
Cheers.